are these people?
I brought this again. We talked about this series by Robert Inlakesh before. He's just adding his part 3, but I feel like this is where I really start in my understanding. Right? We'll get to a quote here that was where I was talking about this, because this all started just as a precursor to, people saying things like Netanyahu created Hamas, right? Israel created Hamas, right? So, which I said, I said this. Turns out, I don't know everything. Been wrong before. So there's some things which Inlakesh is going to get to, but this is the one I think people should probably have the biggest takeaways, because I think this is his like summarization of even his last 2, right? Which were a lot of a history lesson. So we'll get into it. He writes, "You might have heard that Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been propping up Hamas in Gaza. But is there more to the story? Some argue that Netanyahu has an alliance, or at least an interdependency with Hamas to serve his own goals. But is that really true? In the first 2 parts of the series, we explored whether Israel helped create Hamas and whether they've used Hamas to derail the Oslo peace process. Now, we're diving into a different question. Has Netanyahu been using Qatari aid money to support Hamas, aiming to block any actual resolution to the conflict?" Right? So this is where, some of the quotes you probably already heard, right? Specifically a 2019 one attributed to Netanyahu from a private Likud party meeting. So we're going to talk about this quote. If we play.
Quote, "Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in..."
Now, I think I have brought this literal quote, correct? Like, on the show before. So, especially the beginning of this, right? So, I've definitely brought that as like, this is, supports my claims. So we'll see what Inlakesh pushes back on me with.
The West Bank. While Netanyahu has himself denied saying this, let's assume that he did. What he was referring to was the continued implementation of a decision made in August of 2018 when Israel's security cabinet approved the transfer of cash to Hamas from Qatar to be delivered in actual suitcases. Why, you may ask? Well, to understand this better, we have to go back a little further. In 2017, Saudi Arabia and a coalition of pro-US Arab states imposed a siege on Qatar, accusing it of backing extremism and demanding that Doha end its financial support for Hamas. This cutback strained Hamas financially, but ultimately backfired. It pushed Hamas even closer to Iran, their other key ally. That same year, Hamas released a new charter and accepted a 2-state solution and rejected anti-Semitism. They even signed a deal with the Palestinian Authority to take over civilian control of Gaza. But Israeli and US pressure on the PA killed that deal just before it took effect. In a devastating blow to Gaza's already battered economy, the Palestinian Authority stopped paying salaries to its employees in Gaza in late 2017. On March 30, 2018, Hamas endorsed the Great Return March protests, where thousands of Gazans demonstrated peacefully along the separation fence. Israel's response was its forces killed hundreds of demonstrators and injured tens of thousands.
So, any questions so far?
Yeah.
We'll keep the trail roll. So, with Hamas shifting tactics, forming closer ties with Iran, and finding Israel unresponsive to nonviolent action, what does that sound like, Care Bear? We've heard those quotes before. Israel approved the Qatari aid to ease tensions, a move not intended to create an alliance, but to prevent an armed conflict from boiling over. Netanyahu defended the move, arguing that it was aimed at returning calm to the villages of the south. This Qatari aid continued even after Netanyahu was out of office under Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. These names, man. And in 2021 and 2022. Benny Gantz, now a prominent Netanyahu opponent, was the defense minister while Qatari aid reached Gaza. So this is Qatar spent millions to Gaza for years with Israel's backing, right? So, from CNN, that was in CNN, oddly enough. The other aspect of this argument of a Hamas-Netanyahu alliance is that Netanyahu had deliberately pitted the West Bank against Gaza. Yet, this split began in 2006 when Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections during the reign of Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who also decided to withdraw from Gaza and place it under siege in 2005. The idea that Netanyahu suddenly propped up Hamas also overlooks early Israeli policies aimed at deepening divisions between Palestinian factions. Back in 2007, a Palestinian civil war erupted between Hamas and Fatah. At the time, Israel Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and the Labour Party government supported a covert coup plot that was financed and armed by the Bush administration for Fatah to overthrow Hamas in Gaza. When Hamas uncovered this conspiracy and defeated the coup attempt, they took complete control of Gaza, ousting the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority. So, following this, Israel made repeated efforts to prevent any reunification between the PA and the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. Israel tightened its blockade on Gaza, and in 2008-2009, Olmert's government launched the first major military assault on the territory, enforcing a policy of division between Gaza and the West Bank. Qatar, meanwhile, was continuing to back Hamas. Around this time, a leaked U.S. diplomatic cable from March 2008 revealed an Israeli strategy to keep Gaza on the brink of collapse. The goal, according to the cable, was to starve Gazan civilians so severely that they would turn against Hamas. And this was again when Netanyahu was out of power. So this was that starvation principle that they used. So,
Right.
Any questions before I let Inlakesh finish this out? So
Yeah, let him finish.
So, what does this all mean? Well, it's undeniable that Netanyahu has worked to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state, directly undermining efforts at Palestinian unity in 2014 and 2017, but it's an enormous stretch to say that he propped up Hamas. Ultimately, the idea of a Netanyahu-Hamas dependency rests on two assumptions. First, that Netanyahu alone is responsible for Palestinian oppression, ignoring Israel's broader role, and second, that...
What did that man just fucking say? What did he say, Care Bear? Please tell people what that man just told people. Okay? Like, louder for the people in the back, please and thank you. God. Like, I feel like I have to say the same things to everyone who should know better. He just said that, like, it's putting too much blame on Netanyahu, specifically, when Israel is the broader problem, right?
Right.
You know, not just some figurehead in the middle of it. You know,
right. Zionism is the problem in of itself.
Yes, as well as capitalism, which is also intrinsically a problem.
It's intertwined with
internationally. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Hamas operates on the basis of the West's Orientalist depiction of the group, that it is a collection of Muslim stereotypes, which explains its motivations as been driven by an ancient desire to kill the Jews, as US President Joe Biden claims. These assumptions allow for a pro-Israel argument that scapegoats Netanyahu for all Israeli crimes, while robbing Hamas of all historic context, and seeking instead to argue that its members are driven by a genetic disposition that compels terrorism against Jewish people, also assuming their intellectual inferiority and how easily they can be duped into an alliance with their own enemy. Hamas's founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, who was assassinated in an Israeli airstrike in 1988, once said, "The best solution is to let all Christians, Jews, and Muslims live in Palestine in an Islamic state." This statement actually contradicts many of the notions set forth in the movement's original charter, often quoted as if it represents the group today. Despite many disagreeing with Hamas and its tactics, it is seen today by the vast majority of Palestinians as a resistance movement against occupation. Among the plethora of Palestinian armed movements from secular and Marxist to Islamic, which all engage in similar tactics against Israel, it was Hamas that emerged from history as the most powerful in today's climate. While Israel has certainly weaponized Palestinian disunity to serve its interests, its measures were focused on weakening armed resistance rather than supporting any group outright. And claims that Israel created Hamas or that Netanyahu propped them up simply don't align with the facts.
Well, closing thoughts?
Always a lot more new. It's always a lot more nuanced than just the base level statement or the base level video, which I kind of figured.
Yes.
Obviously, being online is hard to try and gather this information for yourself, especially with suppression. So shout out to Robert for actually doing the work to actually piece everything together. It makes a lot more sense. Somewhat. It's a little confusing to me even now, but
yeah, we probably need a few more repetitions in there.
Yeah, but but it's not as clean cut as Netanyahu gave money to Hamas. Because even that wouldn't necessarily make a lot of sense as to and I know you and Indy, we had this kind of talked about this initially at the beginning of this assault last year. If Israel knew that Hamas was going to attack, why would they allow that type of thing? So
partially, I think that's mainly because they're willing to have any excuse to continue their land grabbing.
Right.
So,
but
yeah.
But yeah, it's like I said, it's a lot more nuanced than what people are saying online, even if they're right-ish, I'll say. But but the basic answer is usually the most effective, which may not always most effective of getting the idea across, but may not necessarily be the best method. So
and talking about all this nuance, especially when it regards Hamas, is why we're demonetized. So you can go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork or scan that QR code on your screen if you want to tell YouTube we deserve some money anyway. But we get it, times are tough. People are on fire. People's wallets are just incredibly dry this season. So, just like and subscribe, share, do all the engagement stuff that is supposedly helpful. Leave a comment, and if you're new here, subscribe. That really help us out. So otherwise, thanks for watching.